us from wherever you are in Uganda. And we are here at Serena Conference Center, specifically in the Katonga Hall, and this morning we are here to speak development going forward. At the heart of the matter here is the National Development Plan 3. However, there's a specific issue we are going to be discussing this morning: human capital development and the transition to program-based budgeting. This morning we'll hear where we came from and where we are going and how it affects you and the things that needs to happen in order to see NDP3, but specifically the issue of human capital development coming to pass in a way that impacts Ugandans and the economy in the best way possible. We are again at Serena Conference Center. If you want to join us online, we are live on Facebook and we are live on YouTube. And the hashtag, if you want to join the conversation, is, let me just check it here, Human Capital 2020. Human is with capital H, and capital is with capital H, capital C rather. Human Capital 2020, that's the hashtag, if you want to join us in the conversation. We need now to move on to the proceedings of this mid-morning. And right away, I would like to invite the speaker for our opening remarks. And his name is Mr. Diego Angemi from UNICEF, who is the Chief of Social Policy. As Mr. Diego comes to give us the opening remarks, this discussion is sponsored by UNICEF and the Economic Policy Research Center of Uganda. So we know we're talking about policy here. Mr. Angemi, welcome.
Thank you very much, colleagues, and good morning, everyone. It is an absolute pleasure to have everyone here today, but most importantly, it is an absolute pleasure to exploit our access to new technologies, to have everyone join us both live on TV, but also on Zoom. This is an important event because, UNICEF, over the last 5 years, we've been implementing our country program that comes to an end just in a few weeks. And a big focus of this country program was strengthening systems and understanding how to strengthen systems in a very sustainable way. This remains the focus of our next country program, beginning just in a couple of weeks. And this renewed focus on strengthened systems touches on public financial management, which is the vehicle to deliver equitably, efficiently, what we see a very important milestone, a stepping stone in the national planning agenda through the National Development Plan 3. The transition to program-based budgeting has been long in the making. It's been a journey of successes and failures, and a journey that we want to document and hopefully discuss today in depth to help us guide the elaboration and the unfolding of this important public financial management reform. Program-based budgeting is born out of a notion that siloed planning, siloed policy implementation has left a lot to desire for. When an adolescent girl drops out of school, it is not the fault of the education sector. There is protection at play. There is health at play. There are many considerations that, if planned and budgeted for most coherently, in order to empower and truly enable this adolescent girl to grow up to her full potential, will enable us to be to truly transition to a place where, over the next 30 to 40 years, Uganda can reap the greatest benefits from this demographic transition, which has truly been unprecedented in the country. I will just leave us with a statistic that hopefully in 5-10 years' time will be very different. Today in Uganda, an adolescent girl receives 4 years of formal schooling on average, as per the latest figures from the National Household Surveys that the Bureau of Statistics so diligently and rigorously provides us with. Hopefully, through a more coherent, a more consolidated, a more pragmatic approach to transform the lives of young and vulnerable Ugandans, going forward, these 4 years will become 6, 8, 10, 15. We will completely eradicate dropout and move to a place where each and every Ugandan, can be fully empowered to be an active and productive member of the economy. With those few remarks, I just want to thank the Ministry of Finance, the Economic Policy Research Center, the European Union for being with us today, and I wish all of us very fruitful deliberations and very honest deliberations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Diego, for those brief remarks. Indeed, they set us up to go into our discussion. A few facts. One of the factors of production a long time ago in economics was labor. Yet here it's being called human capital. That changes the dimensions. I hope you guys in the room agree, and the economy is here. Now, these are some of the facts. NDP3 has 17 national development programs targeted for the year 2020 to 2025. And one of them is human capital development, which is partly anchored by the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And this is understandable because the goals attempt a 360-degree treatment of the human being, of human capital. And we're not surprised then that human capital development is critical. The problem, part of the problem of today, Uganda's human capital is characterized by low labor productivity, as the NDP3 says, 38%, low human development, and the human development index at 0.516, not desirable. Solution, and we may hear some solutions tonight, this morning. Therefore, the goal of the Human Capital Development Program is improving productivity of labor for increased competitiveness and better quality of life for all. So it's productivity and quality of life. And we're going to hear about those things. Now, to set us going forward, before we have a panel discussion that is going to deliberate on these issues, we want to listen to our keynote presentation on human capital development program under NDP3. And this will be presented by Dr. Ibrahim Kassirie from the Economic Policy Research Center. Dr. Ibrahim, you are welcome.
Thank you, moderator. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Economic Policy Research Center, I'm going to be giving you a highlight of what the Human Capital Development Program looks like. My presentation will focus more on the aspects that I feel will impact children most. The earlier presenter, Diego, mentioned issues about teenagers and pregnancies and stuff like that. I hope it works. In terms of the outline, I'll provide what are the objectives of, and as was noted by the moderator, this is one of the 17 programs, but one of the key programs impacting directly on children. So I'll look at the objectives under the NDP3, focus on some proposed interventions under NDP3 in the light of education, health, water, and the environment, as well as social development. Then end my presentation on the budget implications for these proposed interventions going forward over the next 5 years. These are some of the key objectives with respect to the whole program, to improve the foundations of human capital development. And as was mentioned earlier, the target is overall to improve our labor productivity and competitiveness, produce an appropriate and knowledgeable, skilled labor force. A key highlight, there is a strong emphasis on science, technology, engineering, innovations. Hence, in the education program, there is quite a lot of focus on mathematics and related systems. We also have to improve health, safety, and management. And finally, to reduce vulnerabilities and inequalities that relate to gender. So those are the main highlights of the Human Capital Development Program under NDP3. And below those specific objectives, there are several interventions proposed that I will go through some of them in the next few slides. A major highlight with respect to the NDP3 is the proposal to keep children in school for 11 years. This takes us beyond the current universal primary education, which is 7 years, to make more or less the first 4 years of secondary schooling, that's the O-level, compulsory. And that has quite a number of implications, as I'll show later. Then, as I mentioned early on, there is a huge science focus in terms of the STEM is the science, technology, engineering, and math, as well as the related innovations. So we propose to introduce project-based activities, and in addition to the current learning that we are doing. There are also several initiatives that try to roll out early grade learning and literacy as a way of improving overall learning within the school system. There are specific interventions proposed focusing on girls, especially to implement a national strategy for girls' education, as well as strengthening affirmative action. A quest is to reorient our current curriculum to allow for science-based project learning, something that we've not been doing in the past. What does this mean in terms of the budget? First, it calls for the extension of the overall education service delivery, the full universal. And I'm saying this in the context that the current universal secondary education is not for everybody. There are eligibility criteria for you to benefit from the public subsidy. But under the NDP, under this program, we're calling for 11 years means you should have completed at least O-level. So it has implications on the current eligibility criteria we use for people to transit from primary to secondary. But there is also worth noting that there are not as many secondary schools as there are primary schools. Hence, there is need to invest in new secondary schools if we are to ensure that everybody who completes primary education does transit into secondary education, because there are not as many secondary schools at the moment. So there is substantial funding required for us to be able to realize this particular aspiration. Relatedly, the heavy focus on science as a means to produce a workforce that is not only productive but also very skilled implies we have to make substantial investments in science-related infrastructure. Beyond labs to issues of project-based learning, these have higher outlays in terms of the kinds of inputs that they require. So this is likely to be very substantial going forward in the next 5 years. When we move to health, we take on parts of the activities or interventions that we were implementing over in NDP2, notably to promote optimal maternal, infant, and child health. Within this, there is a prioritization of nutrition practices, which was absent or not that emphasized during NDP2. There is also access to immunization, which is a priority focus, but one where our indicators have not been doing very well. For the first time, there is a call for a national strategy to address teenage pregnancy. This is a very big challenge. A large proportion of our adolescents drop out of school because of teenage pregnancy. It's also been an NDP target or a health sector development target for, I think, 15 years. We've not made as much progress as we would have wanted, but nonetheless, there is an ambitious target of reducing teenage pregnancies from 25 to 15% over the next 5 years. There is also, as part of the nutrition, the NDP calls for a homegrown school feeding program. This is to address the nutrition challenges of children beyond the 5 years who have been the main demographic group of focus to even those that are of schooling age. And do this as has been done in several geographical locations, notably Karamoja in this country. So with respect to health, the focus is on quite heavily on nutrition, in addition to the other traditional interventions we've had. There is an increased prioritization of nutrition. It's also worth noting that nutrition cuts across, so it's parts of it implemented in the health sector or in the former health sector. Parts of it will be through schools in the education sector. And that is also going to be an important financial outlay within within the budget going forward for the human capital development. And then the other aspects, as I mentioned, the teenage pregnancy, which has also now got priority focus under NDP as an additional health priority. When it comes to water, most of the focus is on expanding access, both in urban areas as well as, but most importantly, in rural areas, because that's where the challenges are in terms of access to water. But a key highlight is the attempt to more or less coordinate or harmonize all projects relating to water, both the fact that the aspects that deal with sanitation, but also water for production. Presently, prior to NDP3, most of these interventions were implemented by multiple MDAs. So under the Human Capital Development Program, there is a renewed call to have all water interventions coordinated under the Human Capital Program, unlike the previous instances where it's not been the case. The last sector or former sector that we look at is with respect to social development. A key highlight within the NDP3 is to expand the scope and coverage of social protection, notably social assistance interventions, to vulnerable groups as well as disaster-prone communities. There is also a call to expand livelihood support and also to promote women empowerment, which has been a key feature in the last NDP through targeted interventions. So these will continue. The Human Capital Development Program also calls for support towards gender equality and gender-responsive budget, an initiative that started in the previous NDP. A key challenge within this is that whereas it calls for expanding access to these kinds of social assistance programs, there is no explicit mention of the coverage in terms of demographics, so the age cohorts that benefit from the social assistance grants for empowerment have not changed or should change in order to expand the kind of coverage that would be expected to ensure adequate social protection. What does this all mean for the budget going forward? With respect to education, there are four sectors that have been merged into one in order to have this Human Capital Development Program. So in the area of program-based budgeting, given the large infrastructure-related interventions proposed, for example, within education, there is a likelihood that education interventions are likely to continue to command a lion's share of the human capital development sub-program. So that's going to be issues of infrastructure, issues if we are able to provide homegrown school feeding. That's going to be very expensive on a per capita basis. Again, relating to infrastructure, we need to construct schools. We also need to construct laboratories and other science-related investments. That is likely to be a huge factor in terms of the sharing of resources within this program. Then, with respect to health, the transition or the focus on teenage pregnancy as well as nutrition is a step in the right direction in terms of having more focused child health related interventions and also ensuring that a much larger population benefits from this. Social development has been prioritized to a certain extent, but without expanding the coverage in terms of the demographics of who benefits from the current interventions that we have in this particular subsector. That means it might not command as much resources as the rest of the other education, health, and water interventions. So in a nutshell, yes, as my colleague Diego mentioned, it's long overdue that we move into program-based budgeting, but also this has also come with particular interventions being proposed, some of which are likely to command huge resources in comparison to the others. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahim, for that concise. I read that some of what you just said, and it was a lot. Thank you for compressing it so we can begin our debate. Right now, I'd like to invite our panelists, because the next thing we are going to do is deliberate, partially based on Doctor's presentation there. I will invite first Mr. Joseph Enyemu, Commissioner in the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development. Please, you can come up. Ms. Amna Selim, economist from UNICEF. You can please come up. And finally, Dr. Francis Mwesije, Senior Research Fellow with the Economic Policy Research Center. These are distinguished gentlemen and lady, and we are going to try to make sense of what Dr. Kasiri there presented and what the human development component in the NDP 3 entails. Not to forget, today we are speaking about children, and we can understand, because whatever happens to a child determines what kind of adult we will have. And if we're speaking about human capital development, the formative stages are very critical to deal with. I had Dr. Ida talk about teenage pregnancy. When girls get pregnant, it starts to be like as if the end of the world for them in terms of potential. Yet they could have achieved much, much more. If they have children at the right age, we realize their potential. So children are good, but we need to manage issues. The panelists, welcome. Mr. Nyimo, the first question. In the notes it says PBB. That sounds like in heaven. Program-based budgeting. Let's start with that. What is that animal?
Well, thank you, moderator. I guess I can take this off. And good morning, those of you present here, and also our online audience. PBB simply stands for program-based budgeting, and the idea here is that the budget is driven by strategic outcomes as opposed to inputs or activities. So it's a higher threshold in terms of what counts as success when a budget is implemented. So in a sense, when we say what does success look like, we are elevating the yardstick from just saying, I have done an activity, I have delivered an output, and we are saying, I have created a change. And so we measure that change. And the idea is that it takes more than one entity to deliver change, which means we need to move in unison in using a common results framework so that our actions reinforce one another and everybody wins. Becomes easier that way. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I understand you well, I'm a journalist, so if I understand you well, let me give an example of a road. The road is an activity. However, how does the road impact everybody around? So when we do the road, we consider the impact to everybody around. We factor in these things into the human being. Am I right? Okay, let's move on to, I'm still staying with you. We're speaking about children, Mr. Nyumu.
Correct.
How will children benefit from program-based budgeting? We have just explained it. Now we are speaking about children. How do we do the link? Maybe children are listening, parents are listening and saying, what's the point? Connect for me the two.
All right. I think a good starting point in answering that question would be an appreciation of the demographics of Uganda. Children constitute a very significant share of our population. Actually, over 60% of our population is under the age of 18 years. And if you lower that down, you could have children in the range of 40 to 50%. Now, you ask yourself, where do these children live? They live in households, okay? The family unit. And so the question then we need to be asking is, how does public investment impact on the welfare of the household? How does it impact on the choices and preferences of the decision makers in these households? And how does it contribute to social and economic outcomes within the household? Specifically in terms of program-based budgeting, the idea here is that the range of public sector players and private sector players whose actions ultimately impact on the safety, the health, and also the potential outcomes of opportunity for these children must be able to sequence their interventions properly so that one feeds into the other. They must be able to prioritize these interventions because we all operate within a space of limited resources. And then ultimately, they must be able to minimize overlaps and duplications which would create wastage of resources. So think about it that by coming together and programming together, one, we identify where the overlaps are and where the duplications are. So we save some resources, not only financial, we save time, we save human resources. If you think, for example, like a community development work, okay? A situation where if Ministry of Education had an activity, Ministry of Water had an activity, Ministry of Health had a community activity, it would make sense that when this community development worker programs his or her activity in that community, he goes with an agenda that represents these different constituencies. But that can only be the case if they program together, and that's what program-based budgeting makes possible. In the past, every MDA would, work out its own program, We could all go with one vehicle, would save on fuel, okay? Save on wear and tear on the roads, and the benefits continue. So in terms of children, I think one, the resource savings within the program means we can invest better. Number two, because we are planning collectively, the sense of prioritization is informed by a bigger picture. And then finally, we think that the common results framework raises the bar of accountability. So the persons and institutions that are trying to bring changes in the lives of these children will be held by a higher standard, as reflected in the high-profile indicators contained in the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, and I let you deliberate because it's important to set the stage for the discussion, understanding that all these players have to work together, and we shall measure them by the result. That's a key point as we go. Now, by illustration, Dr. Mwisije Francis, UPA, Mr. Nyuma has explained program-based budgeting. We program together and we aim in the same direction. Let's focus on UPA, Universal Primary Education. It has had its own challenges, but how will program-based budgeting affect the effective delivery of UPE in your view?
Can I put off this? Thank you, moderator, and good morning, viewers.
You can speak to the mic. Bring it closer.
Maybe let me put this into context. When UPE was introduced in 1997, we have since then seen an increase in enrollment from around 2.8 million to 8.8 million children. That's a huge success. However, we see challenges, two key challenges that have come with it. The quality has remained poor, and the survival in school has remained poor. It stands at 38% as of 2018, according to UBOS. And one of the key results areas of PBB, in short, is to increase the number of years from 6 to 11. Now let's take those number of years to mean primary 6. That is the average education. If we take this and look at numeracy and literacy, I'm coming to quality, you realize that for numeracy, the rate stands at 53 for primary 6.
Knowing how to count.
Literacy, reading, and numeracy is 50.9, knowing how to count. So what does that imply? That you have had many children enroll, but 38% continue. You have had many of them enroll, which is access, the statistics I provided, but actually even those few that remain, those that drop out, we think they've dropped out in primary 6. Almost half of them cannot do those two things. It brings me back to the role of PBB. How will it solve this problem? Number one of the key challenges of the statistics have provided is lack of institutionalized and integrated planning and development. Exactly what Joseph has been talking about. That you have had each sector planning in silo on its own, yet for education to succeed, there are many pillars that fall under different sectors. One of them is health. The other is gender, labor, and social development, which currently have been actually merged into that pillar of human capital development. So how will this help? It means that for education, like the three challenges, key challenges that have been cited, is one, lack of school feeding, two, limited parental and community participation in education, and poor school management. But if you look at these three factors, they actually fall in different subsectors. Feeding and nutrition is under health. Parent and community participation falls under labor and social development. If you look again at school management, it's education. So this is helping to bring these sectors together on the table under human capital development, and you plan as a whole. And that reduces many things. I won't repeat what Joseph have mentioned, the fragmented efforts, planning in silos, and of course, spreading thin resources. So I think the movement or transitioning to PBB will really address these key challenges that we have been facing with UPE, and surely it should improve if it works as planned.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mwisije, for that good point. I will turn to Amna. In school, we used to be asked, what is UNICEF in full? It was part of exams. United Nations International Children Emergency Fund, correct? Okay, we'll come to that in a moment. Illustrate to us how moving, transitioning to capital development, to the capital development program can help socio-economic outcomes. We are still dealing with illustration because the viewers and those in the room want to touch it. So you're showing us. Give us some illustrations on how that transition, what it can bring in terms of results.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to be talking about an example, and it really does build upon the two panelists and their emphasis on siloed, moving away from the siloed approach and moving towards a more kind of harmonized and coordinated way of program-based budgeting. And so today I'm going to be talking about, and I'm going to build on an example about how we can use the program approach to achieve something that is called the demographic dividend. And that is something that, Uganda is very uniquely positioned to attain. So when I talk about the demographic dividend, what do I mean? I am talking about the optimized relationship between population growth and economic growth, right? So in other words, I'm talking about the economic growth that can really result from a larger working age population with a lower dependency ratio. So that means we need a more healthy and educated workforce, right? So the harnessing this demographic dividend, which is something that we often talk about, is not automatic. It really hinges on key strategic public investments in the social sectors. And it's not really also just about where we invest in the social sectors, but more importantly, how we invest in these social sectors. So it comes back to the point about cross-sectoral policies. So what we have found is that the real game changer in attaining the demographic dividend will be about implementing cross-sectoral policies in education, health, agriculture, social development. And these are the kind of conditions and the way that we can program in a better way so that we can really benefit from this growing young population that Uganda is blessed to have, right? So when I'm talking about the demographic dividend and cross-sectoral approach, the reason I'm talking about this today and the reason that it is very relevant is that the cross-sectoral approach to harnessing this demographic dividend, this potential accelerated economic growth, is really better facilitated under the program approach. So the Human Capital Development Program, as we've talked, it moves us away from the siloed approach, and it's really talking about how can we address challenges in a far more coherent and holistic approach. So today we've often talked about adolescent girls and keeping them in school. Diego has mentioned it, Francis has mentioned it, and if we're really talking about keeping girls in school for over the 4 years, this is a problem or a challenge that needs to be addressed in a holistic way. It requires the education sector. It requires different ministries to really come together and work effectively to achieve a given result. And if we work in this more cross-sectoral way, it is more likely that we are going to achieve or harness the demographic dividend. So basically all this cross-sectoral approach and the ideas that we have behind it is kind of underpinned by this report that was published by the Ministry of Finance, the National Planning Authority, the National Population Council, and UNICEF. And it basically showed us that the greatest and fastest dividend we can achieve is through this cross-sectoral approach. And I think that when we're talking about what are the practical actions, how can we really make use of the Human Capital Development Program, I think in terms of a practical action, when we're talking about kind of the mechanisms that could really work to accelerate this, it's really making sure that the program working groups, which are the mechanisms to synthesize and leverage these synergies to not only kind of build the foundations of human capital development, but also puts us in a better position to achieve the demographic dividend. This is the kind of vehicle that where all the kind of actors come together and really try to make sense of how we can leverage synergies in a way that really will benefit the young growing population that we have here in Uganda.
Thank you, Amna. You brought it down to working groups.
Yes.
And synergies. And I guess that is work in progress. Things must come down to implementation. Now we have a document, we are deliberating now, but we have to come down to action for the next 5 years, so that at 5 years we ask ourselves, have we achieved? Let me come back to you, Mr. Nyumo. The money. Setting the medium-term expenditure framework, it's important in how the money is going to be spent. So setting the ceiling for human capital development, how do you see, or how do you imagine it will affect the issue we're talking about here? How critical is it?
The necessity to set a ceiling is informed by the fact that you are not dealing with a theoretical context. You're dealing with a practical context. If you are in your home, you must work within the resources that the income streams of the home allow. Now, in determining how you allocate resources across these programs, of course, we go back to the idea of what are the strategic outcomes that we are really aiming for. And as you have seen, competitiveness is central to Uganda's economic growth, but also the well-being, because incomes of households are contingent on how competitive they are within the labor market. Higher productivity means you have a higher return on your labor, and that comes with a higher income. It means you can afford a better and higher standard of life for your family. So the budget strategy that was communicated by the Honorable Minister of Finance way back, I think in October, did present the national budget, this time around the programs. And I am happy to note that the Human Capital Development Program is featuring amongst our top 3 programs, meaning that it's a priority for the country. And Uganda is a very young country, both by demography, but also in terms of the generations from independence. And so we must invest in our future, and that's why this program commands about 21% of the budget, which is planned for financial year 21-22. And in determining these levels, we undertook a very rigorous modeling exercise in terms of the outcomes we want to achieve, increasing the longevity of the population, transitioning the country to a middle income status, improving the learning outcomes and the years that children spend at school. And that was done. The overall resource envelope to deliver NDP 3 was determined at over 400 trillion shillings, of which the public sector accounts for about 67%, and 33% is coming from the private sector. And each of these programs had a costing. So we adjust based on the circumstances. When we were planning for this, of course, nobody foresaw COVID. And now that we are dealing with a pandemic, you have to revisit your plans and be effective in terms of going through the pandemic, but also coming out stronger. And that's why we are synergizing with the digitization strategy, adopting new methods, e-learning, homeschooling, and all of this. But that's just the frame to show you that it ranks very high amongst the programs, and it's a recognition by government that the future of Uganda lies in its children and in the population. Thank you.
Even I am glad to know that it's prioritized, and I confirm that you are a man of your word. I know it. So it's credible. And Dr. Mwesije, he touched a little bit about the impact of COVID. It's going to be disruptive because the planning was done ahead for 5 years, and now COVID might go 3 of those. However, let's come back to the issue. Finance has planned, and money has been given. How do you think we can, on the ground, get rid of the silos? It's one thing for finance to plan and give money. In their mind, they think people are going to work together to spend the money, but how do we get everyone to work together for the child, dismantling the silos? What's your take?
I think NDP 3 clearly spells out how this should be done. We really need integrated planning and also implementation. That the working in silos should stop with, for example, if you come together in planning and identify priority areas together, you have key results areas clearly outlined, and then look at this as a chain where everyone has to contribute a bit for you to be able to complete that chain. So I think if at the design, it's clear that so-and-so will play this role to ensure that the whole structure is complete, then it's upon those. And again, with now result-oriented approach, if you fail, then it has implications, either on your next allocations. I think finance can use that. And I think that's the advantage of moving from sectors to this kind of integrated approach and planning, or in planning and implementation. So I think it will work if everyone plays their role, and there are clear indicators that if you fail to play your part, it has implications, either on the next releases or other implications in the way you're rated. Yes.
Some kind of punitive measures, even from the accounting officer, the one at the top. He does that sometimes. He warns accounting officers down. Okay. Joseph, I want to come back to you again. So we are talking about PBB. Hope now everybody knows what it means. And there is the IFMS, Integrated Financial Management System, by which accounting officers account and money is disbursed. How far have we gone in integrating the program-based budgeting with IFMS?
I think before I answer that question, it's important to note in relation to your previous question that one of the programs of NDP3 is a program called Public Sector Transformation. The idea that the public sector must up its act in doing business as it delivers public services. So that program is largely informed by the fact that it takes more than money for you to effect change. The culture of the people who implement these programs, the client-centric approach that drives them, and just the institutions, the systems must be built. And so I think that stakeholders at different levels, more than ever before, we need to support system-wide infrastructure. You know, it takes data to manage. So the systems must generate data to manage performance. People must be supervised, and that is not just at central government. They must be supervised at local government level. Communities must play their role to hold people to account at the grassroots level. So civil society must really engage in mobilizing and awakening this consciousness in people to hold to account those mandated to deliver services. And I think we are looking at these things to generate a higher return on the budget that is being invested. And even the children, we are talking about a human capital development pillar. The voices of children in the accountability process is very important. They must become civic agents, understanding their society, and you are in the media fraternity, so making sure that your platforms are relevant for all stakeholders, including the young Ugandans. So back to your point, to deliver on PBB and the system architecture. We are in a transition, and the government did guide that the first year, which is the current year of implementing NDP3, would indeed be a transition year. Government has come a long way in terms of its financial management architecture and systems, IFMIS being one of the flagship ones. This is the Integrated Financial Management System. So the budget for 21-22 has rightly been structured along the program-based planning approach and budgeting. But for this first year, you will appreciate that a budget is not only an accounting framework, it's also a communication tool. It communicates where your priorities lie. It speaks about how effective your investment agenda is. And so I would say that for the coming year, the major takeaway is that we have successfully transitioned in communicating the budget using the program planning approach, as well as, of course, the program-based budgeting. Now, the systems, the back-end systems that will reconcile the numbers to make sure that what you communicated is what is being measured and what is being managed is an elaborate process. That journey has begun with the preliminary work around, studying the design changes that are required in these systems. And of course, as government, we are also big on local content. So to what extent can we